go ahead and get started. First, thank you to Kimberly for hosting us today.
Oh, my
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Welcome to Northwest.
Yeah, and
Hi, Molly.
Hello, how are
Been
you?
over there that whole time?
Yes, I have been. Yes, I got to finish out my last 3 months of last year working here at Northwest. It was a great experience. I really liked it. And two of my girls went to school here. Had Mr. Hill was their all-time favorite too. He's retiring, but anyway. Let's start with introductions. I'm Molly Abraham, school board member.
I'm Chris Gibson. I'm the principal at Alexander.
Matt Degner, superintendent.
Jane Finch, director.
J.P. Clausen, director.
Ruthina Malone, director.
Amy Portmeyer, deputy superintendent.
Charlie Eastham, director.
Lisa Williams, director.
Lucas Patajic, Executive Director of Secondary Schools.
Eliza Proctor, Executive Director of Elementary. Chris did not use her full title. She is also January's A+ for Education KCRG.
Right.
That might be my last one. She has asked for this to my son, Lucy. Sorry.
Oh, I'm Kimberly Fitton, Executive Principal of Northwest.
Good.
Northwest Junior High.
Carmen Guanagali, Director of Curriculum Instruction Assessment.
Kim Colvin, Board Secretary.
Chase Rainey, Deputy Superintendent.
Who's late?
I should have been Deputy Superintendent, Vice President, and Charlie, Executive in charge of best suggestions at Northwest.
Brady's coming too. He let me know he might be a few minutes late, so he'll be here soon. The only order of business we have is I need a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt.
All right. Well, this afternoon, I was going to say this evening, we're happy to talk to you guys a little bit about high reliability schools and some of the implementation at the building level as it's been working throughout the school year. So we had a couple examples we were proud to show you and highlight here this afternoon with Northwest Junior High and what Principal Fitton's been doing, and then Alexander Elementary with Principal Gibson as well. We do have one of the artifacts they'll talk to you about is cell phones, and I know that came up in agenda setting at the last board meeting. I believe we also got the other secondary cell phone policies attached up to the agenda here. So if you don't feel like there's sufficient conversation with that this evening, or you want to talk about that for the board meeting on the 31st, we can still put that on the agenda, but we thought maybe we'd try to attempt to kill two birds with one stone, if you will, here this evening and kind of weave that in at a different point too. But I think that's all I have for an opening. So kind of with that, I'll let Lucas and Eliza take it away, and then you'll get to hear from our building principals here as well.
Yeah, perfect. Well, good afternoon. We are going to spend the next portion of our meeting just going through some updates on where we are with high reliability schools. It's a mouthful, so we will mostly refer to it as HRS throughout the presentation. I'm just going to give you an update of where we currently are. If you remember earlier, I believe in September at a board meeting, we presented our timeline and some information around HRS. We'll give you an update and then turn it over to Chris and Kimberly to give some examples of what it actually looks like out in our buildings, and then we will foreshadow some of our upcoming work. So that is what is ahead for us. I will turn it over to Carmen and Lucas to talk a little bit about our timeline, where we are, and the recent survey data.
So would we like to stand or sit? How formal? Maybe this will encourage me to talk a little bit slower. So just a quick overview from where we were and just the introduction we gave you earlier in the year. Just looking back at the HRS levels as far as building a foundation on level 1. So what you're going to see when Carmen goes through the timeline here very shortly is really that focus this year in the next couple of years looking at level 1 safe collaborative culture. So I'll let Carmen talk through that timeline. Before we get into the timeline, however, you can't see this. It's linked in your agenda, or if you don't have it memorized yet. You can see that there's 8 leading indicators with level 1, all of which are very important. But what we are doing this year is spending a lot of time on 1.1, 1.2, and 1.4, which again is basically how the staff, the students, the community, the parents feel as far as it being a welcoming and safe environment for their kids. And then looking in particular at 1.4, which I'll touch on a little bit later with our secondary teams, is really that need of collaborative teams to better the achievement of our students, both academically and socially emotionally. And I'll turn it over to Carmen for the timeline.
All right. So for the timeline, we're pretty much on track with everything right now as the buildings are working on
collecting all the survey data that they have right now, and they're trying to figure out exactly the leading indicators and your lagging indicators and putting stuff into place. We on level 2 and 3, we're working towards just really putting everything together. The IDS team has been working effectively with the NASOT, so the New Arts and Science of Teaching. They've been doing a lot of training with that book, and they've been working already using some of the rubrics in that book in the background as they're monitoring classes and working one-on-one with teachers through support systems. And so they have all that language, and they're developing the system now to build a structure of support when we do go into that level 2 for next year, so they can effectively work with teachers there. On level 3, for the Guaranteed Viable Curriculum, the coordinators have been working really well with all of their teachers, so everybody's on track to have all of the priority standards for secondary and elementary done at the end of this year. And so then we'll start moving in towards common summative assessments and start working with teams on those. And then later on, start looking into digging a little bit deeper into proficiency skills. So we're pretty much, if anything, a little bit ahead on level 3, because we'll be done with what we did for this year and be ready to go for next year. So for the most part, I can say right now, as we're looking through all levels, pretty much we're a little bit, I want to say ahead, but for the most part, we can safely say we're on track as we're supposed to be.
So if you remember, HRS, High Reliability Schools, right, is a school improvement framework. So it's really about schools improving, being able to look at data, move their work forward. And so when Carmen's talking about that NASOT, that's our instructional kind of improvement framework or instructional framework for how we look at improving teaching in every classroom. So when it talks about effective teaching in every classroom, that's the simultaneity of the work, is that while we're doing school improvement framework and we're trying to improve our culture in our schools on level 1, we're also building capacity to know what effective teaching looks like, and that we have a common way to talk about that, because I think that has been absent in the district for a long time. It's like good teaching if you see it. Well, how do you talk about good teaching? How do you evaluate that? And I'm not trying to use the word evaluative like we're evaluating the performance, but being able to talk about effective teaching, great teaching, what does that look like? How do you replicate those practices? How do teachers talk to each other about that? So that's what the NASOT angle of that is in level 2, to know what is a good framework for looking at instruction, being able to discuss it with your peers. And then 3 is really about, do we know what we're teaching? Are we teaching the right things, right? That guaranteed and viable curriculum, to know we should have confidence that what's being taught at Northwest is what's being taught at North Central, and that we have an effective way to know, are our kids achieving? Are they actually getting it? And just because we've taught it doesn't mean that they're actually accessing it and retaining it. So that's kind of just the brief summary again of those 3 levels. Yeah.
And when I say we're on track, is where we were before, like pretty much what Matt just said. We did not have, especially at the secondary level, we were not all on the same page. So what was happening at all the 3 high schools and the junior highs, everybody was pretty much doing whatever they were doing in the different buildings. And so for the first time this year, we are now on the same page. So all the schools at the secondary level are working in contingency together to make sure that we have those priority standards established. They have some really great conversations, even just determining what priority standards are, and really digging into the process of how do we determine priority standards and how can we create assessments around these standards to make sure we're working with student learning. And so even though we're not working at the curriculum level, they're not working the full curriculum, the full PLC cycle. They're working different parts of that cycle, but they still have an understanding of that full cycle. So whatever they're doing at the district level as a group can also feed into the work that they're doing at the building as PLCs. And so those 2 things kind of work hand in hand together. So,
Carmen, the certification is next year. Would that be at the end of the year?
yes, for level 1.
Actually, I think we're going to have some conversation about
Okay.
that. We might have buildings ready earlier. So that'll be part of our conversation when we go back to buildings within April. We're going to really kind of unveil what certification looks like more in detail at the Coaching Academy, which Eliza or Lucas will talk about next. Can we go back to the front, to the slide? Just one other point that I would make here is, and I don't know how much of the conversation you remember from Matt's initial presentation in the spring or even in August, but although HRS talks about 5 levels, you can see in our timeline that Carmen did a great job of building out that we're really focused on those first three levels over the next 5 to 6 years and getting really solid with that. HRS describes levels 4 and 5 more of a different way of doing business. It's not to say that we might not get into some of those levels, and certainly we do, we're dabbling in some standards reference conversations with certain levels in the district, so. But just as a reminder, we're focused on those first 3 levels. There's 20 leading indicators within that. Heavy focus this year on level 1, but like Carmen just painted, some work happening in the background so that we're prepped and prepared as we move into levels 2 and 3, that we've got teacher leaders behind that ready to go. So some of that work is done.
So are we gonna do building-specific certification,
Yeah.
districts, and a district-wide, or just the buildings?
So the way to have district certification is if you have all attendance center certified. So that would be our ultimate goal, is to become district certified, but that would mean all 29 attendance centers have to have level 1 certification. That's certainly our goal.
And the certification is attained by a self-evaluation process,
No, that's actually
Or is
done through the Marzano
or
team.
that group comes down and looks at it and says, this is okay,
Yeah,
we need to do this.
we've got a whole process that they'll take us
Okay,
through.
thanks, all right.
In the discussions we've had, the certification is one particular process through Marzano, but one thing that's even more beneficial is we know our district and our buildings the best. So looking to add on to that certification process about what it looks like further building, given our district initiatives as well.
Sure, good.
The only other piece that goes with this, I think at the last time that we introduced this with the board was, I think we're right in the midst of our survey window. So one of the important things about this is getting feedback from our constituents, our students, our families, and our staff. So really understanding and using that data to push our next steps. So the use of formal and informal data. And the examples that you're going to see from Chris and Kimberly today are going to show examples of that. Not only just doing what you've always done because you think it's the best, but doing what you do, getting feedback from families, and from students and staff, and ultimately looking to improve on the practices that are going on within your building. One thing that's important to also note in Iowa City compared to probably every other district that Marzano worked with is we asked the question right from the very beginning is, do we have the ability to disaggregate the data from our the staff and the students and the families that are taking the surveys? Their answer was no. And our answer was like, how can we make that happen then? So that's important for us in Iowa City. If you could have been in the meetings with our administrators when they said, no, we don't desegregate the data, it was just like deflating. Because so much of what we do is focused on our equity work. And without the ability to do that, we know that what we do probably hits a large percentage of our families and our students and our staff. It may not hit all. So that really does give us the opportunity to do that through our surveys. So
So you're saying the
we
data
did.
can be.
We did. It did. Yes, it does, and it did. So.
And you guys would be very proud of your administrative team because, like Lucas said, they were deflated because they're like, the data's no good to us then, right? Because, and I think that just shows probably the learning, right, that's happened with our group over the course of years about our focus on different subgroups and our equity goals and our equity focus that they do. Hey, if we can't do that, then what good is the data to us? Because it's only going to tell part of the story, right? So we were glad we were able to push them to do that. And, you know, that was probably a growth area for their organization too, that if you aren't doing that, then why not, right?
The feedback from our principals, like you could tell on their faces they were disappointed in that. The phone calls after, like, you're telling us equity is important in our district. We're not getting that feedback from all of our families. How can we go about doing that? And that led to that push with Marzano. And it also helped that we did the survey internally.
Great. So we're going to just give a few updates of where we've been working, like Lucas was talking about, alluding to those coaching academies. And so we've had 2 coaching academies this far. So in August and October, and then we'll have our final one for the year in April. And during those academies, they're separated into 2 separate sections. So elementary goes for 2 days, and then the following 2 days, secondary has those. At the elementary groups, it is the building principal, their IDS, and 2 teachers from their building that are a part of that planning team. And at secondary, they have a little bit of a larger team. I'm going to explain who comes to yours.
Yeah, we've got teachers, counselor, IDS, admin. Yeah.
And
So
then-
we've got about, usually represented about 8 people with each building.
And then our district directors attend the secondary one too as well. And the first one in August was really deep dive into just overall what HRS is and thinking about the systems that we needed to set up until we had our data in October. That was a really fun session because we spent 2 days staring at numbers. I think the principals were like, my eyes are going crossed. But we really dug into the data and from them then created action plans of where we needed to spend our time and looking at two separate things, really looking at what were areas that we needed to make an impact and we needed to change, but then also what were areas that were successful and what are we doing to make those successful and how do we maintain and sustain that. That's one thing I think sometimes in education we fall short. We're like, oh, we did that, we celebrate it, and then we move on. And then in 5 years, we're like, wait, why isn't that working then? Well, we didn't have a way to measure and maintain that success. And so thinking about our data in those two ways has really helped us to create action plans for where we wanted to go with our data in level 1. We have had really fun administrator checkpoints. Lucas and I have gone out to all of our buildings in November. We're going to go out again in February and in April and spend an hour at each of those buildings just having real honest and open conversations around HRS and how each building is progressing towards certification and proficiency in level 1. Spend time talking about their data, walking around the building, seeing some of their artifacts. It's also a really fun time for me to be able to share some of the things that other buildings are doing. And a principal's like, I'm not sure what to do for this. And it's like, well, hey, my visit 4 visits ago, they talked about this, and this was an idea. And it allows me to bring ideas back to our principal collaboration that we'll talk about in a minute. So we're going to have our next ones here in February. And one question we've really been asking of ourselves, and then going out and asking building principals, so for Shadow, Kimberly, and Chris, is how has HRS impacted and changed the way that you lead your building? And then hoping to ask those questions of our teachers then too, is how has HRS impacted and changed the way that you're showing up and creating your learning environment for our students.
So, Lisa, you said you're going to do that in February?
Yep, we did it already in November, we're going to go back out in February, and then April.
So you would have an assessment idea by the end of February, is that right?
Just how those,
Yeah,
how we're progressing,
how it
just,
works,
yeah,
right,
yeah. Yep. So we ask Lucas and I try to stay pretty tight on what we're going and looking for, and it's not an I gotcha, it's just to showcase what's going on,
Yeah,
how is
right,
it
right.
impacting. And then we have our district planning team, we actually met this morning, that we go over and we'll kind of talk about how all those results are looking, where we feel like we are. We did an activity today, this morning actually, that was like our question was how do we know that we're on track with where we're going with HRS. So a lot of those visits will help us in answering that question. We also have our district and building professional development. Our district professional development is our principal IDS meetings. That we have those once a month for both secondary and elementary. It's new to the secondary this year, and some awesome feedback from Kimberly just today, and our mentor-mentee was how great it was to just get to spend a day with the people that are doing the exact same work as you. And so that's been really great to get to see that. And then another addition with HRS this year are our principal collaborations. We have an afternoon each month that is spent just building principals in the elementary level and then in the secondary level, really digging into HRS and elementary specifically around professional learning communities.
Liza, before we move on, can I just share, and you guys might understand this, but all of those bullet points, whether it's the coaching academy, so for August and October, or the administrator checkpoints, or the building PD, or the HRS principal collaboration, that's all around level 1 indicators, either the whole shebang or specifically, maybe we're talking about in the HRS principal collaboration about PLCs, which you're going to hear coming up, but large focus on level 1. Some of the district PD days that are devoted to the curriculum coordinator level work, that's when you see talk and work in maybe in and out of level 2 or level 3, and more so level 3 around hiring standards.
All right, so we are going to just take you through a couple examples of what we've been doing. We know good practice would be for us at the district level to be modeling and doing the exact same work that we are asking our buildings to do. And so we have put together a couple examples of lagging indicators. So the lagging indicator is what supports the leading indicator. Those are set by high reliability schools. And the lagging indicator is just your artifact or your evidence that you are proving that you are implementing that leading indicator. So an example for elementary around leading indicator 1.4, which is professional learning communities or teacher teams. we were super excited. I might be overly excited, but creating this strategy implementation guide. And so within this, there are 5 anchor statements. And so we're creating this document collectively, and it's taking us through several iterations, and we can get really into semantics and talking about the words. But we have spent the last couple sessions really building out what are we saying as a district our professional learning communities must have. Like, what are our non-negotiables when we're saying that we need to all be having high quality PLCs? What should that look like? And so we've been spending a lot of time, we've got our anchor documents that we spend a lot of time in, but then really digging through our 5 anchor statements and determining what would it look like if you were a proficient team with, I don't want to use that one. Let's use collaborative teams monitor student learning through an ongoing assessment process. It includes frequent team-developed, common, summative, and formative assessments. So if your team was doing that well, these are the things that you would be doing. If you were doing it beyond proficient, that would be in that left-hand column. And so we've been taking this document and really working through it collectively. And then we're going to start doing some field testing on it to see how our teams are doing, and then create SMART goals around our teams so that we can continue to move our work forward, but also having established clarity and consistency for all of our teams. So that's one artifact that we are working through in elementary.
So if you think about 1.4, I think about it on the most simple level, like group work with students. Well, how do we know group work with adults is going to be effective either, right? If you put them into teams, what do they do, right? And so anytime you hear PLCs, it's really about, okay, now we have teachers in these teams, what are they doing, right? And we want them committed to this cycle to know about, okay, what are we teaching, how are we teaching it, what are the results, and then how do we improve our teaching the next time after that. So that's that PLC cycle. So when we keep using that term, that's really what we're talking about. So Eliza's saying, hey, here's what we've highlighted is these are the best practices you should commit to in your teams, right? And that's how then we ask the adults to do the effective group work. You know, we have to teach them what the standard is to say this is what you should be doing during that time to have it be highly effective.
Thanks, Matt. And then our next portion, we're going to spend our February meeting is if we now know the what, we need to learn how do we monitor these teams and provide feedback for when things are going well so we continue with that work, and when things aren't going well, how do we get back on track. Another example, I'm sure they're going to be thrilled that I am showing them, so just put their cute little faces on there. But it's, like I had said earlier, it just captures the first frame, so they would probably die. This is why it's not in board docs, because I figured they would not be thrilled.
Taking a picture and sending it.
Right, exactly. Look what I was to share today. But Flipgrid, these are just a real quick way for us to collaborate virtually. And so every once in a while, I'll have them go ahead and just talk about one of your leading indicators and what are you doing to support that? What's your artifact or your evidence? And so they're just making like these 1-minute clips, and then before a meeting I had them just view 5 other people's to get ideas. Then we spent some time at the beginning of the meeting, go find somebody that you had a question about, get some clarity. How did that work? How are you monitoring? What's your process look like for that, and what has been successful and what hasn't? It's also another way for us here to just say like, okay, we've got some misunderstanding here. We have a huge representation in 1.3. What are some other areas that we want to focus on? So it's a way for us to continue to collaborate and drop these in, and teams can go in. We are not trying to have, a contest of what school can be the best and who can do it better than anybody else. And so we're really trying to just collectively learn together and learn from each other and what's going well and how we can continue to build ourselves as an entire elementary team.
Looking at the secondary examples, I'm getting some quick data here because Kimberly saw some of the things that elementary are doing. I learned one thing that we should do with the secondary principals and one thing I should stay away from. So like that's just
Do
an
the flip
example.
grids and don't to the
That's to the viewer. You don't need to know. So, Eliza touched a little bit on 1.4, which is collaborative teams. At our last meeting with secondary admin before break, so we feel in order to lead the collaborative teams, we should act as a collaborative team within our admin PLCs. So I'm going to give an example of what we did at our last meeting. So each one of our attendance centers at the secondary level took every single team that they have in their building. Some of them are at the building level, so it involves strictly admin counselors, and then it gets down into the academic teams. And you're going to see here one of Amy's 2 tattoos, which is what I always joke about. She's got like 2 different tattoos, one on one arm, one on the other. One of them is about reciprocal accountability as far as how you hold your teams accountable. So I'm going to mention that, so like that means you put staff into meaningful teams. They have time to meet. They know why they're meeting. There's ways to monitor and to support the PLCs. There's also ways to celebrate the good things that happen, and there's ways to confront one another professionally when things aren't going well. So what I asked each admin to do, really out of their own, on their head, without anything in front of them, go through every single team that's within your building and determine where they are in this, within the reciprocal accountability. So you see green, that means those are fully in place based upon what the admin has experienced within their building. 2 is partially, you see in yellow, and then red not in place. So that means not necessarily good, bad, or indifferent. That just means building teams just like anywhere across our system. Everybody's in different spots. So one of the things that we're going to be doing in our meeting tomorrow is breaking that down by content area. So you can see from the very top, you can see where our building teams across our entire system, junior high and high school, fall. You can also see based upon content area where they feel their PLCs are. Now is this data that's 100% accurate? No, but it's where our admin felt that their teams were when we did this at the beginning part of December, which will ultimately determine our next steps. So you can see from our numbers here, we know that we're going to be spending some time how we can monitor and support our PLCs within our building. Now how do we go about doing that? And that's going to be our work that we start tomorrow. Mark, I see a question.
Sorry.
Yes.
Would you just walk me through that one little box? Just because my brain doesn't work very well on this. Just kind of walk me through how one box would work.
Absolutely. So let's take a look at section 4, which is monitoring and supporting teams.
Mm-hmm.
The 3 is that those PLCs. So like right now I'm going to look specifically at building. So that means I'm looking at our student support team. I might be looking at our instructional leadership team. I might be looking at our admin IDS meetings, but those are all considered different building teams. So if I'm taking a look at my ILT, which I know meet twice a month, we have designees from every single content area from every grade level. So when I take a look at section 1, our educators assigned to a meaningful team. The majority of our people felt yes in section 1 of reciprocal accountability. I'm getting way into the weeds here, I apologize, but you get to kind of see the unveiling of the curtain. And then when we take a look at section 2, do we provide, so my instructional leadership team, we meet twice a month for an hour. Are we providing sufficient time to do the work that's important within our building to get it done? The majority of our admins said, well, some of that we have sufficient time, or partially we're not meeting as regular as we should. We know that's an area that we need to grow with these teams, because ultimately this is a dipstick of where we are to where we want to be.
Okay, that's exactly. I understand now how it's a coding that it gives you at least a decent impression about what everybody's. You're right. It's not a perfect science, but gives you the feedback.
And I'll tell you, before any of this, it was just let's get together and vent.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying every PLC, right? But I had lots of experiences that were just, we're meeting to talk about when today in a different school district, somebody said to me, in this building, we have really long meetings to talk about when we're going to have the next meeting. And I would say that's the stereotype for education. That anytime you have professional development, the stereotype would be, it's a waste of time, it could have been an email. And what I love about this, and thank you for the weedy detail, is, well, now we're going to measure it. You got a vent? Well, let's measure it. And let's then...
Be specific about it.
Be specific. And talk about what you're doing well. But it just codifies a whole lot of stuff that's been going on that in the past has just been an ugly mess. When it worked well, it was probably a really good leader who just had a style and people vibed with. But this really is systemic.
So how do we capture that data? Like the first column, are you assigned to a meaningful team? Are you guys sending out like a Qualtrics survey to the social studies teachers and asking them, do you feel you're on a meaningful team?
This is just the principals.
Oh, okay.
Yep, the principals, I said, you got 20 teams. I'm going to give you time with those 20 teams, go through every single team with these six sections.
Okay.
And really just hypothesize based on the experience. So they work together. If they had their associate principal there, those two worked together to determine where they felt they were. It wasn't. Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, Lucas. I just think that's an important point, because as a next step in the process, you could give the principals time to respond to this, put in the data, identify areas they need to work on, and then another quick data thing you'd come back with is say, okay, now let's ask our teachers where they'd evaluate themselves on this, with the different teams. You'd probably have the 38 teams or so that he has there narrowed in for him to say, okay, these are the teams we've identified. If you're one of these teams, mark where you think this falls on in these 6 different sections, right? But right now, yeah, it's just building principal impression data. We could go get teacher impression data eventually, right?
Well, it'd be interesting to see how closely those matched up,
Yeah.
because when we talk about leading indicator 1 point whatever, that's the culture, we're all on the same page, is hopefully they would all line up. And if they don't, then
we have a conversation. Yeah.
Who would lead that work,
The principals would take it back to their teams.
or what we're saying, Peter, or things now?
And then we would then bring that data back together as an entire secondary level. That would-
Well, you guys are leading the HRS work overall, right? That's Charlie's question, is where that decision would come from.
Yeah.
And it's funny you guys ask, because we actually talked about it in our leadership meeting today, this morning, about going out and getting some perception data from teachers, from principals as well. When we talk about meaningful in this capacity, we're at this point talking about 2 separate things. Are they in teams where they're talking about the same content? So Brady and a couple other social studies teachers is my 2nd grade team, or maybe we're talking about common students, like the 9th graders in this area, or students that are here. So those are 2 different ways that we usually group. So that we're talking about common assessments or those coming out.
Because in some of our buildings, to be honest with you, we're just trying to get people in the right teams and give them time to meet. Where some of them that are really gung-ho and have a really strong initiative, they've done the work before, they're all the way over here. And the last thing we need to worry about is, you're doing great things, now let's celebrate the great work you're doing. So we just know that our teams are really all over the place, and we have to take each team where they're at to get them to where we want them to be, which is highly functioning teams.
I'm just gonna add, this is a huge step, so going back to the slide, remember this is 1.4, putting your collaborative teams, right? And so if you think about that, we haven't said as a district prior to this year, as we're digging into the work, that those 6 areas are what we'd like to. We have never been that explicit to say, as a building administrator, these are the 6 things, the 6 big ideas around PLC implementation. We've talked a lot about number 3, if you want to go back to that spreadsheet, which is, we've talked to some degree about what happens when you're meeting in teams, section 3 there, but never to this extent. I mean, Trish, you've been around Molly for the longest, we've never talked kind of that extent. So it's us trying to also provide as much clarity as quickly as we can ahead of what we're asking others to do.
And if it has, it's been in one building or another, right? It's been just consistent maybe among those teams in that one building, but for us to now build that capacity and that strength across all 29 attendance centers, I think is only going to get us leverage to all. Is the beginning of HRS, that graphic that really stuck out to me, is the arrows, they're all going all which way. It just really gets us all going in that same direction.
I know this is in the weeds, but back to this morning's meeting on section 2, provides sufficient time to engage in meaningful collaboration. One thing that we're struggling with, or trying to problem solve now, and we won't have it solved tomorrow, is what to do with our singleton teachers across the district that don't have a buddy
That's what I was just gonna say.
in their building.
2 family consumer science teachers, 1.5 art people.
So those not like educated, like if with like singletons, or it'd be like, let's say Eliza's at Lemmy, she's only got 1 music teacher. A music teacher would be great to collaborate around somebody else that also teaches the same thing at the same time that I do. Well, Lemmy didn't necessarily have that during her time, so how can we put them either centered around focusing on music, so partnering up with another building, or maybe there's some interdisciplinary stuff like the music teacher and the art teacher are focusing around engagement, or they're focusing around more social emotional items. All right, the other artifact that I was going, or piece of evidence I was going to show you was, and Matt referenced this a couple meetings ago at one of the board meetings, is one of the things that, and we had a secondary level meeting today virtually, and we kind of started the meeting as we always do, like what are some great things that are going on, or some celebrations. And it got to me and I did my nerdy piece of like, this is something that I'm really proud of. Because when I came into the position, is like the ability to collaborate, because that's what we want to do. Perfect, all right, let's figure out a way to collaborate. So this is an item that I had used in a previous position about the ability to problem solve in a room with people that are doing the same type of work. The first thing that I talk to our administrators about, we are a smart group of people, the answer is in here. If you're looking for one person to give you all the answers or come to me, I'm not the smartest person, but I guarantee out of the 20 of us in here, we're going to take the problem that you have and we're going to give you some things to go back to your building on to solve it. So this is something we've done in our in-person meetings because it's best done in person. And this is a multifaceted approach about the process about which we're going to really attack a certain problem. So we take a look at these are norms. I'm not going to necessarily go into this, but a couple different things that we've done. We've had 2 buildings go so far. The first of which was West High. So the problem that West High did, and I met with the group first and I said, all right, what's your problem that you want feedback on? You've got to be vulnerable, just first of all saying, I've got something going on in my building that I need help with. Like that's very tough to do sometimes as a leader. So figuring out what that problem was, West High said, we're not getting kids to class. The bell rings for class to start and kids are just still in the hallway. Like, what's some things that we can do? So West High brought that back to the team, and the process is really thorough. Like it gives specific expectations about who talks, who doesn't talk. When you ask questions, what type of questions are you asking? And that's not necessarily to be extremely strict with the process, but we as educators become very solution-centered and we'll start just vomiting at the mouth about here's some things you should try, or some things that are never going to work, so don't ever try it. So we really give a scripted process about what this looks like through, it's about a 7 different step approach. So West High took the feedback about some things that they could try within their building, and you've heard now from the West High student representative the last 2 times talking about how great of improvement they've seen in their tardies since they started their tardy policy just before winter break. So just again, some things that come to fruition around a table, tell me what's going on, what are some things I can bring back to the table, take it back to my staff, because then it requires my staff to buy in as well as the students, and let's take it into action, and we see results. So it's really great to see West High serve as a, like if it did not work and it falls flat on its face, like, all right, so thank God that worked, right? So thank you for having a successful launch. Yes.
And that student gave the board credit, so we'll...
He did, exactly.
It's like, oh,
yeah, absolutely.
It's been all over Twitter, though. I mean, those announcements about people being on time.
Yeah, so North Central went last, and they talked about some different grading practices within their building, that they're having some things, and maybe some teacher buy-in, and so that was some feedback. Theirs may have been a little extensive or a little broad. We probably need to narrow it down a little bit, but those are some areas of growth before our next building goes next month. So those are my 2 examples before we get to the all-stars that are going to do the real work in the building. So.
And I really think the power in what Lucas shared or brought with this activity to the team is it gives them a framework to go back to their building to do the same thing, right? So they do this as a secondary group for the leaders' problems, but now you have a framework and a tool you can go back and use with your own leadership team if you want to address it and attack it that way. So I think it's just a good learning that they all participate in, and then now they have a model they can take to their building to use.
All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to Chris Gibson, and she is going to go through some updates on how HRS is impacting the work they're doing at Alexander.
Hi, thank you for including me. I am an HRS fan, big fan. From the minute I read the book and went to the learning this summer, it feels so good to have a framework in place. And this is my 32nd year in Iowa City School District, and it just feels like we are on the right track. We are making it crystal clear for everyone where we're going, what we're going after. And that's my favorite part, the systematic, focused framework. And it gives us, we're working on levels 1 through 3, and that's 20 leading indicators that we know we have to just go after those 20 things. And so it's clear, and it gives us a very clear process, which I love. We've been at Alexander, this is year 8 for us, but the first few years were really rough. We had a lot of culture, climate, safe collaborative school work to do, and we've been doing that work over these last 7 years, and I'm really proud of that. But taking this just makes it even deeper and richer, which is the second part. I just think about the high quality PLCs that we're able to have now, focused on the standards. So we have been doing PLCs for many years in the school district, but it has been just like you were saying, if you had the right leader or the right training, then maybe you're on the right track. But this really helps us, this keeps us focused on the standards, which in past years, we have really focused on the curricular materials, and we would just go through the book. But we were just doing an inch deep and a mile wide. We weren't getting really rich, deep learning. So I feel like this really laser-like focus on the standards is helping us. I just feel like we're going to make some really good progress. This is the PLC planning cycle. She just had the.
Sorry.
There it is. So what we have been doing is learning about each part of a PLC unit planning cycle. So this came from Marzano, and so we were able to really answer some of these specific questions. What is it we want our kids to know? And so we're unwrapping each of the standards, the priority standards that we need to go after. And then we're working on just all these effective parts of a PLC. So proficiency scales, common formative assessments. We've been teaching our teachers how to really understand if kids are really meeting those standards. So we're working through that slowly, which goes along with levels 2 and 3 of the framework. So it all kind of goes together, which is another beautiful part of it, I feel like. We have been looking at using a strategy implementation guide that Eliza showed earlier. So early in August, we did an initial assessment. How are we doing as a PLC in each of our grade levels? And then we just went back to it. We're in the middle of it right now. And it lays it out for you. It's crystal clear. This is what an innovating team looks like, focused on our standards. I love that. And the other thing that I feel has really changed our work at Alexander is that ongoing and explicit feedback from the stakeholders. We would occasionally do surveys with parents, but we weren't very good about being consistent with our parents, with our staff even, and with our students. And so some of the ways that we have implemented this step is we've Eliza, do you want to put up, let's start with the staff reflection one. Oh, this is, I announced that I'm retiring, and so.
Sorry. It is, I know, everybody's saying so.
Well, change is hard, we know that, and we've got a good thing going at Alexander, and so there's anxiety around that. So what we did is got into some small groups, and we really talked about what we love and value about our school. How can we continue this? How are we going to hold each other accountable for this work? And so it gives them buy-in and some agency and just teacher efficacy to know we're still going to move forward with this work. We're on the right path, we're going to hold each other accountable, and we're going to keep moving. Other ways that we have gotten reflections from our staff is, this is something we put in our newsletter. I send a newsletter every week, and it's just a check-in. How are you doing? How are you feeling going into the week? Is there anything that we need to know about the building? And ideas and suggestions. So just an ongoing way to check it. So Monday morning, Monday sometime, I look at it and then I follow up as necessary. With the families, we continue to work on, I'm going to address this, actually I'll wait and address that a little bit later. Another example for feedback from our staff, our teachers, is we're doing some learning wrapped around like common formative assessments, for example. So we get that specific information from them. What did you learn? What do you still need? And we utilize that in the next learning. So they really can tell that we're using their input, their feedback, to really drive our work. All right. So leading indicators. So we did the survey data that they talked about earlier. And one of the things that we figured from the survey data is, actually, to be totally honest with you, our level 1 data looks really pretty good for Alexander. Like I said, we've been working on that for 7 years. So it looked really good. But what we found out was in leading indicator 1.2, students, parents, and the community perceive the school environment as safe, supportive, and orderly. So staff and parents both were at 4.4. So if they were at 5, that would be strongly agree. If they were at 4, it would be agree. So a majority of respondents agreed that's with this indicator. But our students were just at 4, so they were the lowest piece. So one of the things that we wanted to do is check in with them to see where are they feeling safe at school? Where are they not feeling safe at school? And we just did this with our student council. And you can see from this artifact that the playground and the lunchroom are the areas that had the most urgency to our work. So from that data then, we changed some of our practice. We did some reteaching with our playground expectations right away in every single classroom. We utilized our 6th grade mentor peers and had them help us with that. We started meeting weekly with our supervisory paras just to talk about active supervision. What does that look like outside? Where are your areas? What are we looking for? How do we hold kids accountable? And we did the same thing in the lunchroom. And we'll continue to take those little dipstick temperature checks to see how we're doing, if we're making progress.
That is so interesting, and how informative it would be, like even at, for example, the junior highs, like I can tell you, the places where the kids will tell you, right? But it would be just interesting to see, it's like a heat map at the elementary schools.
Yeah.
What a smart thing to do.
I love how you dug deeper into that.
Yeah, and how where the kids feel it and feel safe or less safe.
Yeah, I hope that we're going to make an impact with that work when we check in again.
Yeah.
I think we will, but. And then the other artifact we had is the family check-in. And, so this, I had to remember what it was. We put this feedback form in I send home a newsletter every other week to our families. And I just put this in as a running document so that they can, anytime families might have questions, worries, concerns, they can let me know in this way. It's an easy way to do that. And then I can follow up. The challenge that we continue to work on is how to get our families involved in taking surveys, giving that feedback. I will be honest with you, I've had only 8 respond to this. We did another survey earlier about evening events or family events. When would be the best time to have a family event? I had maybe 10. We just have to continue to try to be creative about ways to hear everyone's voice. And so we'll keep working on that. Some ideas that we've been floating around as a group, principal group, are just quick surveys that we can take while the parents are waiting in the parking lot, or just bring out an iPad and have them answer a couple quick questions. Or when they come to pick up their kids at school, have them fill out a couple things, just to try to get more feedback. And the other area that we really are working on is leading indicator 1.3. Teachers have formal roles in decision-making process regarding school initiatives. And here again, the staff was at 4.0, students and parents were at 4.3 and 4.4. So we wanted to share, I really thought our staff have a lot of say in lots of decision-making in our school. And so someone shared this idea with us, and we did it at our IELTS, our instructional leadership team. So it really helped everyone see where they do have a lot of decision-making, which is a lot. And I think that was helpful. And then the other way that we have gotten some feedback is we have this professional development form. So we're working on, in math, we're working on some number talks. And we wanted to get specific information about, we were ready to move to the next step, but we wanted to get some quick feedback, what's working, what do you still need, and so we sent out these surveys. And then that really did change our plan of action for the next professional development section. So they can really see that what they're saying and what the feedback is directly impacting the work that we're doing.
So then, when you go to the monthly principal meeting, do you all talk about, we had a 4.0 for our student safety, and so this, is that the point of the monthly meetings, is for you all to share the experiences and the feedback that you're getting and some of the solutions?
Mm-hmm.
So we do a little bit of that. That's another reason why we've done those flip grids, so that you can just do them in the moment and then watch them and then have that repository. The time in our principal PLCs, we do some of that sharing, or we'll do a lot more of that at level meetings. So we still have, we get a chance to be in front of each other all together 3 times a month, which is really unique and is super valuable. So we've tried to bring some of that more into level and have spent that PLC really getting into that reciprocal accountability, those 6 steps to helping monitor and establish clarity. But we have had a lot of opportunity to share those different things, or we'll just throw out, okay, for today's check-in 1.7, what's something that you're doing today? That's what ours was for mentor-mentee 1.7. What are some things that you guys are doing to celebrate your staff? And so we'll just try to pull those every once in a while to hear those ideas.
It's really
And
helpful.
just share them. Any questions for Chris and the amazing work that they're doing at Alexander? Chris isn't going to boast, but the results and just looking at student achievement, our Iowa student, our report cards came out, and the amount of growth that Alexander has made over the past couple of years has been tremendous. And it's been because of this laser-like focus on student achievement and really digging into the work and asking the tough questions and being prepared to roll up their sleeves and get dirty in it and make mistakes and learn from it and get feedback and act. So
Lisa, did you say the student achievement data has improved over the last 2 years?
at Alexander, it has.
Significantly over the
improved
last,
significantly.
yeah.
So we're going to talk about that at the board level, or we're not going to do building specific things at the board level?
I mean, we're talking about the board level here.
Yeah, all right.
I was going to say, we're talking about it a little bit, Charlie. I think you're going to hear from 2 great principals tonight, right? And the things they're doing that are making a difference, right? And I think the thing for us to remember as a system, as great as these folks are, our kids can't have an experience dependent upon the person that gets to serve them in the classroom or in the leadership role. And so our job as a district is, how do we create systems that try to assure some level of responsiveness and high quality education to all of those kids, right? And so what Chris did, in the last 7 years from learning in the trenches and putting this together herself, is something we would hope a building principal would get day one, right? This is what you should commit to. This will get you the results you need to do. That's what I feel like we owe to our leaders, right? They shouldn't have to figure it out on their own about what are the things you should commit to doing that can get you a high-performing school. Because we can't just have pockets of excellence, right? We have to have excellence across. And so that'd be a little bit of my answer to your question, Charlie, is because I think I know where you'd want to go, right? Is, okay, well, what's the magic sauce at Alexander, right?
Well,
Yeah.
No,
Chris.
that's not quite where I was
Yeah.
thinking, about what I was thinking. Because I'm trying to think of this from the standpoint of the district using a high reliability framework, method or process for having this in all buildings. But it's probably going to be in some buildings now. Maybe we could use that without emphasizing buildings or how wonderful principals you are, to show everyone in the district that this is achievable, and more importantly, the community, that this is where we're going and we're getting there.
Sure, and I think we can talk more about that. I think that, Monica says Chris is the difference. Chris still is the difference, right? That's the thing. And so we can have all the great things here in place, but if they don't get implemented and they don't get monitored in the right way, you're still going to see problems, with implementation and with student success. And so I think there is definite conversation for us to follow up on to say, okay, what is the right way to go about this? How do we commit to these things? And it's still putting great people in the job to make sure it gets executed. Because you can have the great playbook, but if somebody isn't executing it for you, then you're still going to see problems. So, yep.
I feel like we're defining HRS
Yep.
in this exact
Yeah.
position, so.
It's the beauty, it's
Yeah.
the beauty of the framework.
In
It
summary,
really is.
HRS. That's exactly what we're trying to do. And I think to your point, you're wondering if it needs to be on the agenda at some point where we highlight its effectiveness so that we're giving great examples of it. Is that what you're saying? Because HRS is doing this thing where they're trying to get it district-wide. That's the whole point of it.
I guess I'm thinking about the last equity committee meeting, actually, where the chair of the equity committee wants to know what we're doing to improve our proficiency numbers. And I'm thinking we've got some education to do to show that this is what we're doing. We're working on the process. And the reason we're working on the process is because we are convinced that the process works.
Yeah, well, I think that's, what are we doing to achieve those numbers, or to improve our numbers? Well, everything, right? But what's everything? Well, this is how. I mean, back to the arrow example, right? When you have all the diverted energy and you don't know where you're going, well, we have to have a plan, right? And so the plan is this, and then we show how it connects the dots to get the increase in the student outcomes, right? But if we just focus on there's going to be one magic solution to get those increased outcomes, which I mean, my critique would be that's kind of where we've been at previously, right? We thought it was going to be this thing, or it's going to be this training, or this aspect that we put in that's going to fix that. Well, it's not, right? It's not just any one silver bullet type thing. So I do think that's a good conversation for us to come back to, Charlie, and make our connection back to the strategic plan, connection back to the comprehensive diversity, equity, inclusion plan, and why this is the framework we've chosen to try to get those increased outcomes.
It's just like that equity thing that Lucas talked about earlier. Now it's part of our culture, right? We hit a tipping point, and now it is part of our culture. And right now we've got these pockets that are doing really well with the HRS. We've got these role models, and that's the beauty. That's why teams are so important. Is that these people are pulling others up until we hit a critical mass where it's now our culture. That excellence is now our culture.
Yeah,
right?
That's a great point, Jane. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I do think
we learn those best practice models from each other, right? And then we're all doing the best practice. Yeah.
That's why it's so important and so critical to work within a team. And you know, there's an African proverb, right? If you want to get there fast, go alone. If you what's the
Go far.
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Right?
I do think that it would be helpful if we, because this is great for the board, but for the public, right, not so much. We need numbers, charts. So a way we can tell the story of how we're doing this, I think, is just something for us to think about, like how do we message in a really soundbitey, like something that will get
In a more digestible manner.
more digestible.
I think the district stuff's helpful for you guys. I think these building-based examples that are being shown, those are the ones that would speak to our community, right? Like, what did Chris do with their staff?
Right,
With
the
data?
cafeteria.
What's Kimberly going to show you here that they've done here to change what's happened? Those are the practical things people can connect to. I mean, our oversight and accountability for the leadership team is a piece you guys probably concerned about, but most in the community aren't going to pay much attention to, right?
Well, I think the community also is gonna understand, we got a 4.0 on this, that was low. Here's, like, the map is great, right?
Yes.
Here's what we did, and then when we resurveyed them at the end of the year, or whenever you send it out, this is what happened. And hopefully it goes up. Like, that to me is very digestible by the community.
Yes.
So that's how it comes out, is numbers, areas of focus, examples of change, results.
Yes.
And hopefully the
Yeah,
results
that's
will
what I
all
said.
work out the way.
The 4.0 is having to find things to work on, by the way.
Yes.
So
Yeah, by the way, yes, I was
Yeah,
thinking when you were like 4.0, so we had to do some work. I was like, I thought that was really good.
Right. We're going after it.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Chris. We're going to turn it over to Kimberly for some examples of what they are doing at Northwest.
Can I brag on you first?
Yes.
No.
Do you want to be in here while I do
Continue.
it? Northwest holds a dear place to my heart. I was here for 2 years as an AP a long time ago. But I had a chance, because of some sickness in Kimberly's office, I had the chance to come in here for a day and a half to rekindle that little flame that I had of helping and supporting, which I probably didn't do much besides annoy the heck out of Kimberly. But just to see the rapport and the respect that she shows her kids, and I say her kids because if you see her interact with the kids, it's like they belong directly to her, even though she probably doesn't want to take some of them home. But just the amazing respect that she has with the kids to not only hold high expectations, but when they do have a little glitch in those expectations, she's right there to support them. And the same thing could be said with the staff. It's just amazing to see. I don't know what happened in the past few years, but I do know the experience that I've seen Kimberly with her staff and her students has just been phenomenal this fall.
So I have no live links. Thanks, Chris. I do have some qualitative phenomenological information for you. Carmen's going to send you the commercial for the new Northwest, should she find it. Yeah. So Northwest is near and dear to my heart. I'm a product of Northwest under Bryce Hansen, and my principal made a huge difference in my life, like putting groceries in the fridge, taking me to sports. Like it's Bryce Hansen for me all the way, and Marion Coleman. So like, I too will never know the full impact of what my staff and students went through in this building, and I am going to keep my visceral reactions and saying how is HRS impacted. So I am very familiar with HRS. I had that in Cedar Rapids, and it was implemented in all the things. The other thing that really helped in Cedar Rapids was Safe and Civil Schools, a structure, a safety format taught to us by Kathy Hose, which just was so effective. It took Jefferson High School from having, fourth hour was our most tardy, like skipping and all of that, right? It took it from hundreds of tardies and skipping to 0 within 6 months of implementation. I'm not. And so what I did at Liberty was, before I implemented it at Liberty, the walk, talk, be on time, our goal was to look at the hot spots on where fights were happening, and then not tell kids they can't, but to give kids the structure for passing times, walk, talk, be on time. I was dean of students then at Liberty. They hated my guts. And then it would work, and all of a sudden there weren't fights because everybody was active. So we put zones together and did the same. And McKinley from Jefferson, like it's just a system that works. So HRS gave me the language to soften the blow of all the new things that my building would be doing. And so with 1.5 days of pre-service, they got all the information I could jam pack them with. They were exhausted, and they did everything I asked them to do because I was able to like point it, right? So an increased intentional effective communication with stakeholders. I needed, the families didn't know me because of the busyness of the summer and just being a first year building principal. I didn't get to do my door knocking like I wanted to. So making sure that I videoed my families out, that they knew what was going on. Parents came to me. My first meeting was with Casey Mayer, who was like, what about these cell phones? And what are you gonna do about it? So I put a spin on the cell phone policy that was at Liberty, and I'll talk about that later. The cell phone policy was at Liberty and scaffolded it, right? Scaffolded. So you can't just, at Liberty, you would, if you pull the phone out, you got one redirection maybe, but the teacher would send a Liberty help, and then the SAC staff and student support staff would then go get the phone. Well, the biggest point of contention was I'm losing a part of me for the rest of the day. So do I then approach it at that level at high school, or do we scaffold it like we do everything else? So we came up with cell phone jail, which some teachers refer to it as. We just say cell phone second chance, right? And so I'll get to that later. But this is how it's impact. So the communication with parents and students, I answer students first. Parents, if I have the time during that time, and then teachers, because they're right in the building and it services students, but students are my number one if we're doing that right, which I heard from the students. I spent time in the last 2 weeks of last year, and the students were like my welcome wagon, and they told me what they wanted, what they didn't like, and so I got the temperature check before the HRS survey in October. So tumbleweed hallways, I like to hear an ant fart on cotton, but I also would like to notice when there's a student running. And so there are stories about just wandering for hours on end throughout the day, pulling kids, other kids pulling kids out of classrooms, just teachers' inability to do what they signed up for and passionate about, which is just to teach. So the other thing was we decreased the numbers of students outside of the classroom. I'm jumping around a little bit, but my examples for that, cell phone policy and Northwest Help, which I procured from Liberty, and I think it really should be in every building. It's phenomenal. So that's, I will say, I will share my biggest artifact is from a student we received right before winter break, which student feedback is super awesome. So before I get into details, please, I'm gonna leave the student's name out of it because they're very, very candid in their feelings, but along with teachers saying I was gonna quit and look for another job, Mr. Hill, who is retiring, saying, I think it's the best time now. I'm happy to come to work, and I think it's a great note to end my career on. I'm happy to come into work every day. Teachers saying they don't lock themselves in their classrooms. They're engaging. All of my staff is outside greeting students. You can come here anytime and you will see them engaging. I had a panic attack one time. I was like, oh, I haven't been to the second floor. And it brightens my heart every time to walk up the stairs and to see them all out there and building relationships with kids. And that's level 1.1 was my focus. And I had to talk to my staff and be like, oh my gosh, I didn't plan for 1.2 or 1.3 or 1.4, and that's where we're at. And all of a sudden, oh, I thought we'd be at 1.1. So here, this is from a student, this is on the 21st of December. Hi, Ms. Fit, and I just want to start with how amazing you have been at the school. I was here before when my brother Peyton was in junior high. The walls were peeling, there were no windows. Still not the case, I don't know where the students are. And it was a sad place. Now it is happy. It's a happy, welcoming place to learn. You put student safety and comfort first and rules second. This school was a dump, fights every day, and it was not a safe space for my brother when he took me here. I am trying to say you and the other staff here have changed the place from a dump to an amazing, welcoming place we all like to call Northwest Junior High. I look forward to coming to school every day because it is safe and welcoming. No phones means more education, and I like that. Thank you so much for everything you've done for me in this school. It's a blessing to be here. Happy holidays.
And that's a 7th or 8th grade student?
This is an 8th grade student. Yeah, who, my 8th graders hold the most trauma in this building. So and it's taken the longest for them to adhere to it, but they understand that love has boundaries. This Love and Logic says you might want your phone and you have to learn, right? So you can go to the next one. So our leading indicators, so when I met with staff during pre-service, I said, how will we know? You know, we introduced the leading indicators and we talked about, just talking about how will we know that we have met this. And so they gave me a list of things that they wouldn't see. One, students in the hallway, cell phones out in class, fights. We had, I'm so sorry, I have to be really frank, we had a champagne room here, and so there were kids doing things they shouldn't be doing during school time. It wasn't physically a safe space, not just for fights. So we had a lot going on. So we said, so our leading indicators came with before the HRS survey, right? So what was interesting was the parents, the news of how great the school was had not gotten out to the parents by October, right? Not to the masses. So I'm going to be overjoyed when we take this again to see just how much we've grown. I geek out over it. So you had 2.9 in safety, which would be, I mean, higher than what I would expect from what they remembered in previous years, right? So I'm not really mad at it, but this says it's not safe, right? It says it's not safe. But staff, 3.7. It's looking good, right? Which is even going to be even more because you have that, is this just a phase or is it sustainable? So all stakeholders identified not feeling safe and needed systems of support. There were no safety systems. There were no like tardy policies in place. The one that was put in last year was just so that we get everybody where they needed to be to the end of the year, right? Now we needed to have that, and we needed to have consistency and fidelity and hold each other accountable, the courageous candor, all those things, right? And so we all agreed that we would do it in our PDs. This is what we said it would look like when we meet these. Now, how are we going to hold each other accountable? Sometimes I had to put my foot down and say, this is what we're doing. You're going to be able to teach, you're going to enjoy your job, and our kids are going to feel safe, and they're going to learn. We're going to do that. And so they all agreed. I've got great staff. They all agreed. So anyway, all stakeholders identified that. So we put Northwest Help into place, and the one thing I stressed was, in order to feel safe, students feel safe, we cannot power struggle. If a student is doing what they shouldn't be doing, send that email or call down if it's an emergency. We will come up. Make sure all of our student supports, including our SFAs, had radios. There was communication. The feedback we got was that previous admin had sent the text to their phone. Well, if you're busy, you can't check your phone, right? And so we use those radio systems, and it was really important with my admin staff. I said, we need to respond. I need it to be like hot potato. Let the teachers see you, build that trust and fidelity there, right? So Northwest Help, great. Counselors are on that as well. So if it's a mental health dysregulation, they're on that, so that our kids are served, our teachers are served as well. And then for our pre-service data and with families, it was like 2.8 orderly place. Again, those systems, and then the cell phone issue. So I explained at Liberty, their cell phone policy, you have the phone out, the teacher could give you a redirection or not, but you're losing that phone until 4 o'clock. Here, that would be extreme. So when I thought about it, how could I modify that to meet the needs of my building, right, without a power struggle? That was the inevitable, right? So everybody got cell phone pockets. If the student pulls it out, you know, the bell rings, we're not trying to gotcha. The bell rings and the student has it out, gently remind them or tell them to put it in the pocket. And this is a redemptive measure so that the student can then say, oh, let me redirect myself, because if I put it in the pocket, I get it back at the end of class as opposed to 4 p.m. This gives them control. And it worked. Now, we also created a cell phone log. So if a student is putting in the pocket first hour, second hour, third hour, now we know you need to turn it in at 4 p.m. Right? Let it go. And then you start it again. We had people recording fights. Cell phone contract for you. If you record it, which we knew going into it, when you're implementing that safe and civil, and I put my fit and twist on it, right? So when you're implementing that, you got to know that your numbers for discipline are going to look high and then they're going to come down if you're running it right. And if they stay high, you need to look at some things, right? You reevaluate. So we put into place, because we knew that cell phones were being used as a form of bullying and harassment, right? So then if the student that gets in a fight you're recording is suspended for 3 days, you, TMZ, are suspended for 3 days as well. PR, student word of mouth, is the best PR. News of our implementation, what we were implementing, spread to West High. Kids would try and come here for games, but we heard about you. We heard about your cell phone policy. And I was like, are you going to join us? You got to turn your cell phone in. I was just joking with them. But there it was, right?
It's
and
true,
so,
you're right. It spread.
I'm
the different
notorious.
schools. Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
And then it turns into teachers not having to argue and debate over those things, but it was always that redemptive measure. So when a kid did get their cell phone taken to the end of the day, you're doing too much. This was not the case. I want Mrs. Bruning back. I said, well, you can see her next year when you're at West High. She'll still be there, and I'll tell you, said, hi, what are the rules? What are the expectations? They know it. So we implemented TRUE. We changed it from swag to teamwork, respect, understanding, and engaged, right? So then everything is by that matrix. There was nothing on the walls, right? Safe collaborative means that students can see themselves too, or the understanding, and it's the best to hear, are you being true? Stay true. Are you true? Like just that language, and then having the insignia on the wall as well. Like I said, adding restorative components, like I literally thought I was going to spend at least the first 7 months on 1.1. And it was amazing when we looked at each other during PD and said, oh, we gotta move on. We get to move on. The other thing we implemented were restaurant passes. And so we changed the color every try. Next year we're going to have them screen printed, the teacher names with our kids. Our kids are geniuses. And they learned how to duplicate passes. So we just support that, and yeah.
The fact that they have to have a counterfeit pass means the expectation is they have a pass.
We there were 7 passes with 7 different colors, and we didn't know what was going on. So now we have, if it's a pass from the office, the administrator, it's white. If it's a pass from teacher to teacher, counselors are on the white passes, right? If it's teacher to teacher, it's gold. If it is a tardy pass, it is a neon green. So that we don't have a negative interaction with the student. Have the pass in your hand, say good morning to them first, redirect, and it's just a whole culture shift. We also preparing for middle school, and the fact that we're going to be doing training in PLCs, because like we had that in Cedar Rapids, and so I like want to implement that in my building, right? then get them where it's 7th grade language arts, literacy, or social studies, math, literacy, so that they're working all, and it's not just by subject area. And there's that influence of getting to engage as staff. So it wasn't just safe and collaborative for students, but safe and collaborative for teachers. And I remember Mrs. Busher saying, I was the only one out in the hall. You know, I didn't get to see my colleagues. It was really scary last year. And now I get to see them out, and I don't feel so alone. It's just really great. And so being on PSDO meetings and hearing the parents that come on and just like, I just come in and say thank you. I was scared about sitting my 7th grader, and now it's okay. And like that, that totally works for me. And lastly, for real, when West High was having their, it's really nice to see your imprint, and every place that you've been is pretty cool. So Liberty's Walk Talk Me on Time, North Central has Walk Talk Me on Time. We have Walk and Talk. The kids are like, stop it with the be on time. It's been walk talk, walk and talk. And then now West High has that zone and guiding for those tardy policies. So it's like bits of safe and civil without having to spend like thousands of dollars on that training, but implementing and using our admin PLC process to like help each other.
So it sounds like to me what we got, and I could listen to you guys all day. It's just great. I mean, I really love it. Sounds like we have, with HRS, we can take these wonderful things you leaders are telling us and spread it. I mean, that's why HRS works, right? So it used to be you could listen to a great anecdotal story and be like, well, that's awesome. And then I'm like, well, let's see what's not happening in my kid's school. That's the normal thought process you have in a district of our size, right? Size. It's like, oh, well, it must be nice. So the dream for me as a parent and as a board member is that, we've got you guys who just did an excellent job presenting this stuff. You're digging into the details. I freaking love it. You got you guys who are doing the work, and it's working, right? Plus we have a board member who did it for the district too. So HRS helps us put that together and spread it, right? So we are making sure we're using all these ideas. You were working on HRS before we knew what it was. You turned the culture of a building completely around. I mean, if we could just take that and move it around using the systems that we now have, that's the dream, right?
And there's always been great things happening, but when you communicate with different languages, you can
Yeah.
always come back to say, well, that's your building, you don't know what it's like in mine.
Right.
But
Exactly.
I know you have those kids, I have these
Yes.
kids, that's not gonna work in my building. But when you have a common language to center around a framework, it makes all the difference, because you can't always put those excuses, which have prevented the work.
And
Right.
the framework also helps hold administrators, leaders accountable. It says, if it's not within that, then why are we doing it?
I think that's a key point, Kim, right? It's like if it's not in our framework, then why are we spending time on it, right? And just to go back to Kimberly's leadership, so the kids didn't change, the teachers didn't change, right? What changed was the leadership, right? And how we're doing this. And yes, we have a nice framework now, but back to the point I was making earlier, it still takes a leader to be able to implement that and do it in a consistent way. The framework's nice to be able to share positive examples, and Eliza and Lucas talked to you about some examples where we're trying to learn from each other as a group. The other thing is it gives flexibility, though, to implement it for your building culture, right? Because every leader's, just Kim's example about the cell phone thing, if we'd have scripted a secondary cell phone policy at the board table in the district and then given that to her, that would have been much more difficult, right? And so I think there's some cautionary tales in there, too, around you can't just take one program, one plan that works on one campus and think that's now going to work everywhere, right? But the framework, what it allows us to do is say, when we're having a problem with this thing, as a building leader, who can I learn from that's having success in that? And then how do I take that element of success and implement it here? So it's a back to the school improvement framework, right? It's not a framework for us to say, wow, that was a great example there. Now as a district, we need to do that everywhere. Now there are some things we are definitely going to learn from this, and we're going to say, yes, these are district expectations, these are the things we should do. PLC is a great one, just as that example we built out. If you have a high-functioning team, that's what it should look like in the Iowa City Community School District, right? But the beauty in it is having these flexible models, too, that buildings can respond to the need as they need to. And that's the part that I think will be important for our community to understand, too. It's not that the district's doing everything the exact same. We're empowering our leaders to make decisions that do respond to the needs that they have in their buildings while having this consistent framework and set of expectations across the district. So that's kind of where I wanted to pick up with the cell phone conversation, and I know we already you know, we usually try to limit our ed committee meetings to an hour, and we've already held these people longer, so maybe we'll have to come back to that. But that would be my tie-in to the cell phone piece, is there you think about as policy and how hard we got pushed, right? That we should have a consistent one, and then you hear her example about why we might need to have some flexibility. As long as you have one, and you feel like you can implement it, and you're seeing a change. And I get the idea that we should have some basic tenets in the district, so nobody's arguing that. But I think it's just an interesting thought exercise for us to continue to talk about when we have things that work in one building, what's that mean for the rest of the district? Because we've been down the path, right, of saying, here's a great program, let's try to get it out to everybody, and then why does it fail at some buildings and work at others, right?
And
So,
I know, Matt, you wanted to try and tie the cell phone. I would like to have that cell phone.
That's the thing, I
tied
think we need to
from,
come back to it,
yeah,
but we don't have time
because
tonight.
Hearing from people that have tried to listen to other ed committee meetings, they find them interesting, but also hard to track because we also have visuals in front of us and we're following along. And they're like, what the heck are they talking about? And sometimes people just don't have as much interest in just the listening piece of these meetings.
Well, the cell phone topic though, I'm just wondering how we would structure it. For example, you know, to have Kim speak at the meeting, or how, I mean, that'd be great. But again, I'm not you guys, I don't know how exactly this works. But it would be just interesting to me to see how that collaboration works, or do you do all that in advance and then you guys present it to us? Like, I would want to hear everything you had to say about cell phones all over again. You know, I want you to tell me everything you did, because it's just really helpful to process it. But then I'd also want everybody else to hear it too, and then see if they did something that worked at Southeast, although I have kids at Southeast, it's not working. But, you know, just to get that around, just to spread that around a little bit, to see, so how does that look with structure? And you don't have to answer now, but I'd like to know before we go into a meeting like that we're going to do it well.
I think because I think with Fina's point, then it's on camera, and people are going to go back and watch the video. So however they present it, but I think a presentation with maybe some visual, whatever, but something.
Well, keep telling her how great she is, so when I invite her back for another please keep telling her, yeah.
I do think what's key to the policy and what we as a board should keep in mind and support is what you said about discipline. That your discipline was going to shoot up at the beginning of the new policy. And I think whatever the policy is going to be at all the schools, the admin needs to know that we get that and we understand it, because when you put in new rules, they all want to see if you're serious, right?
So correction, we have only had to suspend 3 kids for cell phones, and that was only because they recorded the fight and then uploaded to Snapchat. Word spread so fast was that other than that, we have not given out detentions for cell phones. We have not suspended, and kids stay in class because they see it as the pocket is your friend.
That's even better. But I'm not afraid if your data, if you have a bunch of discipline, and then what you said is key, right? And then it goes down. And if it stays at the same, then there's a problem. But I think we as a board need to message that to the building administrators, that we're not going to get super concerned right away if you implement a new policy and we see a bunch of increase in discipline, as we're going to take a long view of the school year and revisit where you are at the end of the school year to see if the policy works. To me, that's what the board does.
I agree. I just think it's not, I mean, I don't think they're as worried about what we think about the discipline. I think they're thinking, we don't want to spend our day disciplining.
Right.
I mean, that's a big problem.
I think some of them are worried about, I don't want to suspend these kids because the board's looking at disciplinary data, and we're not allowed to do that anymore.
They just don't want to get into the power struggle with the kid overtaking their phone.
Yeah, no,
that's the biggest,
I think it's a real testament to our kids, how quick they're going to learn when we are clear about expectations. Because the truth is, this age group are adolescents. They need structure. And they will fight you tooth and nail, and then when you put it in, they're like, oh, yeah. It's just
I think you're exactly right. I mean, we can come up with any cell phone policy we want, and it can be effective or it can be a disaster. That's the thing. It's really about how you decide to implement it, right? I mean, some of the things do work as effective deterrents if they know we're going to follow through. It's just like the fighting policy put in place. It had to be an effective deterrent. That's why we said it was a deterrent. So once they knew we were serious, we were going to move a kid online. If you kept fighting at school, guess what? Right? We didn't see numbers skyrocket. Kim didn't see numbers skyrocket because they knew she was going to follow through with what she was doing.
You suspending the TMZ
Oh, it
I
was
can't
the
tell
most
you how much.
heartbreaking. They were just devastated. Are you serious?
I can't tell you how that's the biggest problem, is this like constant crazed obsession with having to videotape terrible things
Yes.
and it just feeds the worst impulses of humanity,
Yes.
you know,
And traumatizes people over and
yeah,
over.
over and over and over and over again, and with such, it's like you don't even know, they don't even know what they're doing, and so we need to take that away from them. Like,
So one
stop.
thing maybe to kind of put a, I know we want to talk through timeline, you guys can kind of see the
can
timeline
just
there
read it,
without
let
us
us
spending a
know
bunch of
the
time on it, but this bigger conversation Lisa's getting to, I do think is an important one, just as we continue to work with our admin team, because I do think there's a little bit of concern out there, and something we've even talked at the central office, that there's probably a little bit too much of when there's a discipline issue that central office is called about what do we do. We've spent a tremendous amount of time working on a discipline protocols and procedures handbook, right? And we need to have our principals feel like they're in the position that they can look at that handbook and they can make a decision about what happens there, right? As long as they're staying tight to the handbook, right? Otherwise, now what happens a lot of times is when they're not confident, then they call us and they want us, you know, helping them on that decision, which of course we're happy to do. But there are some things where if we've created a policy, then we are going to have some trust that our building administrators execute that policy. Otherwise, we're spending our time on, okay, kid A did this today. When I look at the book, this is what I see. What do you guys think should be? And that's so that we do try to stay consistent, because we don't want to have bias and we don't want to have unfair discipline handed out. And I think our principals, I don't want to assume they're always second guessing themselves, but they're checking themselves on that to make sure they're thinking about it right. And so for us, I think as a district leadership group, we have to think about when we communicate a policy, if we're comfortable with the policy, now we need to trust our folks to go do it. And if we start to get data that is concerning to us, then let's have that conversation, right? Not criticizing and blaming, but let's ask ourselves, okay, why is the policy producing the results we're getting? So I do think that's a good one in general for us to come back to, even larger than anything to do about cell phones in
Well,
town.
and I'll just add, I don't know, I can't remember who was with me at the meeting here last year. I know there were 3 of us, but the teachers, we can't, the teachers told us, we're afraid to discipline kids.
Yeah.
So I mean, and the DPP was still not finalized, so we're in a different space now that that's finalized. But I think that that's a big hurdle. They told us that we as a board told them that they weren't allowed to discipline kids. And I think we have to fix that.
I have to think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I have to think that part of the success of this policy is that you've done the groundwork on the establishing a safe and supportive environment for the students. They feel safe, they feel respected, and so they're going to be more likely to follow your rules. They don't think of them as being arbitrary. They feel like they belong, and they respect the authority from which it's coming.
Yeah, so I will use 8th grade as an example. They hated me. They hated everything I did, because last year was fun for a certain group and then terrifying for others. And so we just drilled it in homeroom. We drilled it for 2 weeks. Every teacher was on it. Admin popped up and had conversations with teachers that didn't. So it's a lot, right? It's the knowing that I'm not changing my mind. We put that information out to parents and let them know there was going to be a cell phone policy. And if your student said that if they refused to give it to the office, when they went home that day, their parent and they knew that for the next 2 weeks they would not have their phone in the building. And then it's all also how you feed the information. So right now you tell me what to do. If you don't give me your phone, then that tells me that you want to be without your phone for the next 2 weeks. Or you want to be without your phone till 4 o'clock. Putting the phone in the cell phone pocket means that you get the choice, so you're in control, and you get your cell phone at the end of the day. That's love and logic, right? And so it's from that negative, punitive to the language of choice, where it's like this and this and this, you tell me. And then parents are behind it. I think the only time you got called was when the kid, TMZ, got suspended, and the parents were like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. But then your kid decided to videotape someone getting their head beat in. You gotta be kidding me. And so that's what we're doing. And so parents knew, students knew, help me, help us. That's it. So just how to communicate, and then communicate again.
And Lisa, that wasn't exactly where I thought maybe you'd go after I said that, but I think the thing I'm trying to draw out, you guys really haven't done anything different since last year, right? And so nothing's changed, no message from the board has changed, right? Kim is new here, right? And the teachers would have a completely different take on, I think, what they're hearing or seeing from the district, right? Or about what's allowable and what's not allowable. So I think just trying to intentionally connect that dots, and when we're getting data that shows us there's a disconnect between what we believe we're communicating down and what is getting communicated then out, asking ourselves a different question, right? It's not that, oh, do we need to really change a policy? It's about, okay, why are we getting that information right now? It's the same process they're working through about, okay, if we're getting data that doesn't add up with what we think is happening, then why is that happening? So I do think it's an important one for us to connect to. I think our reaction sometimes is maybe just to jerk to a place that isn't really what the problem is. The problem isn't the way our discipline protocols and procedures are written down, right? I mean, they're in a great spot. They're as good a spot as they're ever going to be, guys. I mean, the amount of work we put into those, now it's about executing those.
And
Yeah.
great leadership, which is what
Yeah.
we had described tonight.
And that's
I mean,
execution, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's, you realize how important it is. The building leadership is just, it's transformative.
That's the word. That's the word.
And both of you are examples of that.
Would you guys like to see Northwest in video?
Yeah.
That'd be
Say
great.
yes, everybody.
So he just hold that slide, and then we're gonna leave it with you with the Northwest video. This is Amy's fabulous slide. We want to make sure she's got some time to go on her slide, and then we will put Northwest's fabulous, new Northwest video.
Thank you.
The new Northwest.
Just real quick, those last 3 bullets should not be a surprise to the board because we approved contracts for those last 3 items. But I just specifically wanted to point out what's happening between now and the end of next year, which is, continuing the focus on, primary focus on level 1 with that kind of work that's happening behind the scenes for level 2 and level 3. And I'll give you real concrete examples of why. So once we get into level 2 more formally, that 24-25 school year, level indicator 2.1 says you want to have an instructional framework for your district. That's NASOP, that's this new art and science of teaching. So we've got to have a group behind that ready to, get out there in the trenches and help do that. So there's a ton of learning going on with instructional design strategists, our IDS, around that. It's not to say that our teaching staff haven't heard rumblings about it, maybe even having a conversation with the IDS and a classroom teacher now. Those things are starting to, those conversations are starting to happen. And then Carmen's working really hard, and Sarah Fairfield with our curriculum coordinators around level 3, priority standards, proficiency scales, common assessments, because that's all around guaranteeing viable curriculum. That work is so central to the PLC conversation that is happening back in level 1. It's hard to not be doing that work. And priority standards are the first thing that we have to get done, identified, revisit over time, because you can't do the rest of the work, meaning identify proficiency scales and write common assessments, unless your priority standards are done. So I think about I used the term this morning, these big, hairy, audacious goals that we set kind of the tone and tenor for at the beginning of the year. We want all subject areas and grade levels to have priority standards identified by the end of this year. It's like, well, can we really do that? And then I've got Sarah and Carmen coming to us, by December saying, we're in really good shape. We've gotten some of our teams, in fact, done with that. But it's so central to the work. So kudos to the leadership that's been around that. And then we've got a
And do you guys know how long we've been trying to write those things? I'm sorry, it's like we could stay here all night talking about this. The years Amy and I have talked
I was going to
about
ask
doing
Carmen
this.
when you first
how
said it,
long
I
it's
was like,
taken.
you're lying. And she, oh, we're ahead. I'm
And
like,
now
"Oh."
because we say this is what
Something
we're
we're
doing,
done.
because it's important, we're done
Yeah.
in 6 months.
But it goes back to what Chris says, the beauty of the framework, like it's super clear. Nobody's arguing with us that these 20 indicators are coming. Nobody's yet arguing with us that 2.1, this NASOP framework for instructional framework, which is going to have 43 elements in it. Like nobody's arguing about it because people just want to know, like, what do you want us to do? Oh, we promise we'll work hard and get it done. And that's evidenced here with Kim and Kimberly and Chris's conversation. So in a couple weeks, or actually next week, we've got district and building administrators and a few teacher leaders going to the HRS Summit. We'll be attending a variety of sessions about, you can go to any, all levels will be described and discussed in breakout sessions. And then the rest of the stuff is stuff that's been on you guys' radars. Thank you so much to Eliza and Lucas and Carmen and Chris and Kimberly.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's see this new Northwest video.
This is our rebranding,
All
because we
right,
have a
Kimberly.
narrative. Here we go.
Well, let's make sure that the volume's gonna
And also, this is not, I think the one that we just got, Laura was able to send it, this is not the edited version, this was the soft one. And so our goal is not to highlight anybody by name, so that it doesn't matter who stays, who goes, that it's all about Northwest and the kids, so.
Kimberly signed on for 10 years, however.
Yeah, she did. 10-year contract.
That's a special one.
Yeah.
Welcome to the new Northwest. At Northwest, we are building confidence. Welcome to the new Northwest.
This is edited because she says her name, so it's not the final one.
At Northwest, we believe in teamwork. We love Northwest Junior High. We love our students. We care for our students. Northwest Junior High is a great middle school. It's like all students that are of 7th and 8th grade. Northwest Junior High, y'all feel welcome to the new Northwest. At Northwest, we value and honor the diversity that makes us unique.
It's his dance at the end.
I know.
So is that available on the district website?
So I'm gonna send it out, it'll be posted on our website, the edited one will be posted on our website after I send it to our families and score and present to PSTO to Harmon.
Great.
Thank you,
Thank you
Kimberly
all.
and
Thank
Chris
you.
for coming tonight to present.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Great.